Welcome back to the King Film Sports College Football Playoff Scenarios video for Week 14, and we'll be going into every single college football playoff scenario, every team that can get in and how, and let's get right into it with our conference championship week. Many of these teams are playing, but let's start with Tier 1. Winning in, and Ohio State obviously drops from this tier after the loss to Michigan, so now we have 4 teams remaining, all undefeated. Florida State got the narrow win over Florida, but they are the most insecure of these teams. Georgia, Michigan, Washington. 2 of these teams are favored. Washington, a 9-point underdog against Oregon. And then FSU, let's get into their scenario. They probably should be in with a win. If they can take care of business by 20 plus against a Louisville team that just lost to Kentucky, then they will probably be in. The only other scenario is like a Texas being in over them, which I don't really see that happening if they're 13-0, even when people give the examples back to 2014. But I like FSU to make it in if they can win, and I'd like a convincing win at that. But let's get into Tier 2, which has our teams that need to win out and get one thing to happen. I think Oregon is in with the win. The only reason I put them on this tier is because they do have that one loss right now. And theoretically, if the committee sees either a Texas or a Bama over them, I guess the Pac-12 could be left out. If Oregon wins, they are, again, a 9-point favorite over Washington. And then I put Texas here because they have consistently been below Oregon, but above Bama just because of that head-to-head win at Bryant-Denny. And so they need one loss and then a win against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship. They're favored by 12.5 points, so I think that's going to happen. But then they need a loss by either Florida State to knock out the ACC and then add Texas to the mix there, or a Bama win over Georgia. That could knock out. That's the scenario where the SEC could be left out entirely. Everything goes to chalk. Doesn't matter in the Pac-12. Michigan wins, Florida State wins, Georgia loses, but then Texas also wins. So then Texas is in and the SEC is out. I don't know if the committee would truly do that, but it seems to me from how they've been ranking the teams so far that they would. And we can add to that the fact that Alabama pretty much lost against Auburn, besides that miracle play, down to a 0.01% chance according to ESPN analytics. That was a little bit flawed there, but they do escape against Auburn and leave themselves in a position where they can beat Georgia, and then they also need one loss. If they get the loss from FSU, then that knocks Georgia out of the playoff, and FSU, Texas would make it, Oregon would make it, Michigan would make it, and then I think Bama would be 4 there. Or they can just have a Texas loss, and then since they'd also, again, be knocking out Georgia, Bama would be in that case. So let's get on to Tier 3, and these are our chaos scenarios. I've got the Ohio State scenario in here, and then a couple scenarios where a team loses. Just remember when you don't see Michigan here with the loss, it's because they're a 20-point favorite, and we'll get into the Michigan scenario when we get into the Washington. But the least likely of these is the Ohio State. I think they need this specific permutation of conference championship winners to happen. They need Louisville to win the ACC, knock Florida State out. You'll see that is needed in all of these projections. The committee already wants to knock out Florida State, but just losing to Louisville would give them that reason entirely. Then you've got Oklahoma State beating Texas. Again, 12-point underdog, so this one's going to be tough to make happen. But if it does, then Texas would be out with 2 losses. Georgia winning would knock out Bama because Bama would have 2 losses. So then that would be one playoff team in Georgia. You want a Michigan win also against Iowa just to make sure that loss from Ohio State to Michigan is as good as possible. So that's 2 teams, Georgia, Michigan. And then you want Washington to win to knock Oregon to 2 losses, knock them out. Then I think Ohio State could sneak in. Again, Washington, 9-point underdog. Oklahoma State, 12-point underdog. And Louisville, 5-point underdog. Michigan and Georgia are both favorites in their respective games. So I assume that Georgia will be number 1 going into this week. So let's see what they would need if they were to lose to Bama. They need the Louisville and Oklahoma State wins as well to knock out Texas and FSU from playoff consideration. And then all I think they really need left, they don't really care if Michigan wins or loses. Michigan's just probably going to win. That's probably a foregone conclusion. But the only thing they really care about is knocking out Oregon, because say Georgia loses and then Oregon wins, you've got that argument between Washington and Georgia. at the 12-0, and it looks like Georgia would probably be in that case. But again, Georgia loses that argument if they lose. It depends how these teams lose. But if you've got Oregon in there and then you've got Michigan probably in there, then Georgia would need to win the argument over Ohio State, which I think they would, and then a few other teams. So they probably only need these three things to happen, and maybe they'll only need Louisville and Oklahoma State to win, because maybe they'd win the argument over Washington. We'll see there, but we'll have to see what happens in that case. And then Washington probably needs these three things: Georgia to win, so that knocks out Bama, and then the Louisville and Oklahoma State. So it would be Georgia, Oregon, Michigan, and Washington. That's the 2 Pac-12 scenario there. Also for Michigan, again, if they lose, it's probably they could have some of this stuff happen. I find it hard to find a scenario where the Big Ten is left out entirely. Say Michigan does lose to Iowa, and then say Oregon beats Washington, maybe they could get in or get left out then. Say Bama beats Georgia and all the other stuff happens, and Texas wins and FSU wins, maybe the Big Ten's left out in that scenario. We just have to see that. Loss to Iowa would be debilitating. So there is certainly a way they're left out, but with a loss, I don't really see a path for them to get in. I mean, they just have to win the argument against Washington. They probably need the same thing to happen. Georgia to win, and then Louisville to win, and then Oklahoma State to win. So let's get into my New Year's Six and college football playoff projections. So I think Oregon's going to win as the 9-point favorite. I think Michigan is going to take care of business against Iowa. Then I think Texas will win as well. But where I have chaos is Louisville beating FSU. I picked Florida outright last week. That didn't pan out. I think that Louisville has a good chance of winning. And then I have Alabama beating Georgia outright. So this would be the playoff. It would be number 1 Michigan against number 4 Bama, and then Texas against Oregon in the Sugar Bowl. And that seems like two great matchups there. If FSU was to win, then the SEC probably is left out entirely there. But for now, the Orange Bowl is Georgia against Florida State, Fiesta Bowl, Washington against Penn State in a rematch of a few years ago, Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, Tulane against Ohio State, and then the Cotton Bowl, Oklahoma against Missouri, but we'll have to see about those seedings there. Thank you for watching. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel and comment your predictions below.